Let me start by expressing my gratitude for allowing me to crave your indulgence in making this statement. Chairperson, during the testimony of Dr. Ben Ngubane, you asked a pertinent question, which, in my opinion, if answered, will put into context and clarify the events that took place at Eskom during my tenure there in 2015 and 2016. Chairperson, during that testimony, you referred to a question that needs to be put to Optimum Coal Mine, along the lines of, and I quote what you said, how did you allow whoever signed on your behalf to sign a contract that the price would be the same for 10 years or more? Were they sleeping or what? Or what was? How could you have signed such a contract? Nobody signs such a contract, close quote. Those were your words, Chairperson. And unfortunately, Chairperson, these questions were not put to OCM. Because I think, although it was during Dr. Ngubane's evidence, you were asking about OCM's lack of, or the reason behind what they did. But the answers to these questions are at the heart of how and why we find ourselves where we are today. While they were not asked, nor had they directly answered these questions, Glencore did shed some light as to how they had put themselves in that precarious situation out of which they were demanding to be rescued by Eskom. Glencore did not sign the contract that you refer to. Glencore bought the contract with the company that had signed the contract. They had bought that company together with the SCA. CSA, Coal Supply Agreement. Although Mr. Efron is a chartered accountant, he admitted that Glencore did not conduct a due diligence on Optimum prior to the acquisition of the company and the contract. Nor had they bothered to acquaint themselves with how the coal supply agreement worked. Instead of conducting due diligence and understanding how the coal supply agreement worked, they did something extraordinary, Chairperson. They sold 9.64% of the shares in the newly acquired company to Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, a political heavyweight, and made him chairman of the newly acquired company. That was a strategic decision to use the former Secretary General of the African National Congress and former Secretary General of the National Union of Mine Workers, a member of the National Executive Committee of the ANC at the time. They knew that the profitability of the company could only come from a successful renegotiation of the coal price and ignoring by Eskom of the penalties that were accumulating at the time. Mr. Ramaphosa was their bet. The profitability of Optimum was therefore dependent on the peddling of political influence and the extent to which Glencore would be able to exert pressure on Eskom directors and management, and not on the fundamentals of the company that they had acquired. This, in my opinion, was the source of Glencore's problems. They had made their bet and needed to lie on it. It was unfair and arrogant of them to demand, as they were doing, that Eskom should effectively pay for the irresponsible manner in which they had tied themselves into the proverbial knot. You observed, Chairperson, that on my arrival at Eskom, there was, and I quote you, A complete change of attitude on the part of Eskom on the deal that had been proposed and had been supported by various levels of management, close quote. You were referring to the deal that had been entered into by Eskom management and Glencore to save Glencore's skin from the consequences of purchasing a company having not conducted due diligence. Eskom management and Glencore were in the process of subverting Section 38 of the PFMA, which talks about the duty of a state-owned entity or a state body to collect what is owed to it. When the international coal price was high and Optimum enjoyed super profits, they had not shared their spoils with Eskom. What was unfortunately lost in that exchange is the fact that Optimum was a cost-plus mine. It had been built with Eskom's capital and had been given a 40-year contract. Eskom had responsibility for the mining costs, and in return, Optimum received a fixed margin. Eskom was unfairly excluded in participating in the super profits of the time when times were good. And yet, it was expected to fork out more capital, forgo its legitimate price expectations, and subsidize rich international corporations when the times were bad. That is the situation that we found ourselves in. Eskom had a legitimate contract with Optimum. In terms of that contract, we at Eskom were supposed to get from them coal at the price of 150 rand per ton until 2018. Those were the terms of the contract. Whether they liked it, whether they didn't like it, those were the terms of the contract. In addition, they had accumulated penalties in terms of that contract to the value of 2 billion. That 2 billion was had accumulated from 2012. I think it was Mr. Bester who said that he actually had calculated the 2 billion. Optimum demanded that the price of coal be increased to 530 rand per ton, and that the penalties of 2 billion should be written off. It was their opening negotiating position. 530 rand from 150 rand. An increase from 150 rand to 530 rand per ton would have meant a transfer of 6 billion rand from Eskom to Glencore over a period of 3 years, 2015 to 2018. Add to this the 2 billion write-off of the penalties that they were asking for. The amount that Glencore wanted Eskom to pay for their original mistake of not doing due diligence was 8 billion rand. I was having Eskom's interests and those of the country at heart. What was happening was wrong on many fronts. It was literally going to financially ruin Eskom. But there was an added issue to this. The Glencore position would have seen an inequitable situation. The poor and most vulnerable in the country would subsidize the dealings of the rich. There was no way that I could, with a clean conscience, attend public gatherings and meetings and shout from the rooftops that Soweto residents needed to pay their debt to Eskom, when I was allowing international corporates to disadvantage Eskom on many fronts, and that we had no funds to fix the apartheid wage gap that still exists between black and white employees of Eskom. There is still an apartheid wage gap at Eskom. While rich international corporations were unduly exploiting Eskom. As I have stated, the payments to Glencore would have sunk Eskom. You will recall, Chairperson, that this was at the time when load shedding was becoming the norm. I could not, Chairperson, say to South Africans that load shedding will continue because we do not have enough money to conduct planned backlog maintenance on our electricity generating fleet, and still allowed 8 billion to be unjustly transferred to Glencore.